Hello, my name is Maria and I'm the research manager of the Lilly Foundation. And I'm going to be talking to you today about our mitochondrial disease research update. So essentially, where are we up to with mitochondrial disease research? And that's across the UK, but also what type of research has the Lilly Foundation been funding? I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the emerging techniques that we're starting to kind of hear more and more about and really kind of break them down and explain how they're going to be useful in the future. And just share a little bit about how our research is going. And yeah, just sort of give a general mitochondrial disease research update. So, the way that I wanted to start this is by talking about what are mitochondria, because I think you've got to start at the beginning, otherwise things start to get even more complicated a bit further on and it just all gets a little bit confusing. So the way that I like to talk about mitochondria is thinking of them as the batteries of the body. So imagine mitochondria are the batteries that are in every single tiny bit of your body. And these batteries provide energy for absolutely everything that your body does. And some parts of your body need more energy. So if you think about the parts of your body that are kind of working all the time, they're working really hard. So you've got like your heart, your lungs, your kidneys, your stomach, your brain, just to sort of name a few. They all need a lot of energy in order to work properly and to kind of keep your body working. And when they don't have enough energy, then they don't work properly. And that is essentially what mitochondrial disease is. So just like batteries can wear out or malfunction, not work properly, mitochondria can also go completely haywire too. And mitochondrial disease is like having faulty batteries. So they can't produce enough energy for the body's needs. They just can't produce enough energy for the body to function as it's supposed to. And these organs that we were just talking about before are just not going to work as well as what they're supposed to. And that's going to obviously cause a variety of different symptoms for somebody, which are potentially going to be quite unpleasant and cause a lot of problems for a patient. So that is essentially what mitochondrial disease is. Now, when we're talking about mitochondrial disease and how it kind of occurs, I like to think of it as making a battery. So think about the instructions to make a battery. In this scenario, it's A plus B plus C makes a healthy battery, a battery that's working properly and that is going to power your body for the foreseeable. Then, if you have a problem with that, so instead of A plus B plus C, you've now got a change in the makeup of the instructions of that battery. And you now have A plus B plus D. And that's going to make a battery that doesn't work properly. It's not going to have very much energy. It's not going to power your body properly. And these changes to the makeup of the battery or the instructions of the battery are what we call mutations. And these mutations or changes disrupt the normal workings of the battery, which lead to a decrease in energy production, and your body is just not going to work properly. So my face is slightly in the way there, but how is mitochondrial disease inherited? So yeah, again, my face is in the way. Mitochondrial disease is inherited in a number of different ways. And the way that I'm going to talk about it first is mitochondrial DNA inheritance, or what is more commonly known as maternal inheritance. Now, the way that I like to think about this is imagine your mother has a special recipe book that she got from her mother and her mother before that. This recipe book goes back absolutely generations. And all of these recipes are specifically made by the mums in the family. She then is going to pass that recipe book on to her children. But the way that I like to think about this is, well, what if there's a mistake in the recipe book? If there's a mistake in the recipe book that the mum has made, then her children are all going to inherit that mistake and they're all going to make dishes the wrong way. And this mistake essentially represents mitochondrial disease. So it's when that mistake has only been passed down by information from the mother. Then we've got nuclear inheritance, which is both maternal and paternal. So this time, I want you to imagine that you've got a recipe book that's been created by both of your parents together. So your dad has given half of the instructions and your mum or mum has also donated half of the instructions. They've each contributed half of the instructions into this recipe book, which is then going to get passed down to all of their children. And again, if there's a mistake in that recipe book, then the children could potentially end up making a wrong recipe. And this mistake represents mitochondrial disease again. So it's when that mistake, that error, that mistake in the instructions has been passed down by both parents. And that's what nuclear inheritance is. So I wanted to talk a little bit now about the current state of mitochondrial disease research in the UK, because there's a lot going on and we're really lucky to be living in a country that has a lot going on in terms of mitochondrial disease research. First of all, we have the leading research centres. So you have London Mitochondrial Centre, which is UCL, Newcastle University and the MRC Mitochondrial Biology Unit in Cambridge, and the University of Oxford. Oxford, Newcastle and London there make up the three highly specialised centres. And then Cambridge also has a really large mitochondrial centre as well. And that's just to sort of name a few. There's also a lot of other universities, a lot of other institutes that are doing mitochondrial research in the UK, but those are the leading research centres. Then we also have a lot of international collaborators. So Lilly actually sit on an international board, and we come underneath the umbrella of international mito patients with all of these other patient organisations from across the world. And we come together to share the views of over 8,000 mitochondrial disease patients across the globe and just make sure that we're keeping up to date with research that's happening overseas, and also just to make sure that if there is anything sort of happening that we can inform our patients about or other patients about, everybody is kept on the same page. There's also a lot of ongoing clinical trials and treatments. So we're currently searching for chemicals or drugs that already exist to treat existing treatments that could potentially be used to restore mitochondrial function. We're also alongside that developing novel treatments. And then also there's a number of current UK clinical trials, which I'll go on to speak about a little bit further down the line. And then in terms of future directions as well, so we're really focusing on expanding our genetic testing to provide not only accurate diagnoses, which is, as we know, absolutely essential for developing effective treatments and offering reproductive options to families, but also offering closure to people to know actually what type of mitochondrial disease they have. And that's something that the Lilly Foundation are really strongly focusing on right now. So my head is yet again in the way, but this says how far away from treatments for mitochondrial disease are we? And this is a graphic that I really like to refer to whenever I kind of give talks. And the reason why is because I think it's really important to understand this concept of the paths to treatments. And this path to treatments is long and it's windy. We start off with sort of basic scientific research, and we'll look at maybe understanding the mechanisms of the disease, looking to find out something that we didn't already know. This could potentially open doors to looking at new treatments, some new ideas. Something then might go through to actually be used in a clinical trial. Then we may get knocked back. It might not work. But every little bit that we know and everything that fails, everything that works, everything that is going to be going towards expanding our knowledge in this area is going to be leading us down this path to treatments that we're eventually going to come to. And I really firmly believe that everything that we're doing is going to get us to this end goal. It's not an easy path by any means. It is quite long, it's quite twisty, it takes a long time, which I'll kind of come on to a little bit later. But ultimately, the message is that we are going to get there eventually. Everything that we do, everything that we pour into research is going to get us down this path to treatments and eventually get us treatments or even cures. So something that I think is quite important to understand is this, as part of the pathway to treatments, clinical trials, something that is potentially quite a confusing area to be looking into. And all I kind of wanted to talk about with this slide was just show exactly how many phases there are in terms of clinical trials. You have preclinical trials, which is sort of those initial studies in the lab, actually finding something out, something novel, which will then go through to phase 1 trials, which are sort of looking at a small population of people to see if something's actually safe to be used as a treatment. Then it'll move into phase 2, which is again looking at safety, but also actually measuring that effectiveness in a number of people. Moving then on to phase 3 trials, which is looking at even more people, monitoring long-term side effects, monitoring that effectiveness again. And then moving into phase 4, looking at even longer term side effects. And essentially, from research to treatment, so sort of from preclinical to phase 4, this can take a lot of years. It can take a long time to actually get something from bench to bedside, to get something from that initial concept actually to patients. But we will get there, and it's important that we go through these phases to actually get a treatment that is going to work for people. So now the fun stuff and what I really enjoy talking about, some new developments in mitochondrial disease research. What's new in the world of mitochondrial disease research? So something that is finding more and more momentum is natural history studies. And these are studies that are essentially long-term observation projects where scientists and doctors can watch over time how a disease changes and progresses. And this is for a number of reasons. We get a lot of information out of this. First of all, we understand mitochondrial disease. We can identify patterns. We can then develop treatments, measure treatment effectiveness, and then actually design better clinical trials. So if we first look at understanding mitochondrial disease, as we know, mitochondrial diseases are very complex and they affect people in a number of different ways. And actually, by watching patients over time, we can really learn a lot about the progression of the disease, including things like common symptoms, how quickly the disease actually gets worse, and then also what body systems are most affected. And when I'm kind of talking about this in a room full of people, the reason why I say this is important is that I can talk to somebody at the front of the room and then somebody at the very back of the room, and they're going to have very different symptoms. They're going to exhibit mitochondrial disease in probably very different ways. And that makes it really hard to actually understand the disease and understand how different symptoms affect different people, how different types of mitochondrial disease can affect different people. So actually a natural history study, which is observing these patients over a long period of time, can really help to understand this a lot better and help us to actually move forward in our analysis and our search for treatments. Which brings me on to identifying patterns. So natural history studies can help researchers to see patterns and variation in mitochondrial disease. Like I've just said, some symptoms may appear earlier in some patients, they might not even appear at all. And age and lifestyle are quite likely to affect how the disease actually progresses over time. And we're not going to know that unless we actually observe these patterns in patients over time. And that's why a natural history study is so important, to actually get us that information. Then looking at development treatments. So by actually understanding how a disease progresses, researchers can really try to find potential treatments and targets for those treatments. So researchers can actually look specifically at what parts of the disease are progressing, and if those can be potentially slowed, if they can be stopped, and if they can we develop drugs that actually work towards those mechanisms? Or can we maybe look at some therapies that are aimed at that part of the process? Then we can go into measuring the effectiveness of that type of treatment. So a natural history study is going to be used to actually compare against when we're testing new treatments. It's all very well and good us saying, well, we think that this improves a specific symptom, but actually, without being able to compare it to something else originally, we're not actually going to know if it's working or not. So natural history data is absolutely essential in letting us measure that effectiveness of a treatment. And researchers can see if this treatment is actually making a difference by comparing the progress of treated patients to the known natural history of the disease. So we can actually see, is it helping people get better? Is it helping to slow the progression of a particular symptom? It's really important that we know this. And then finally, it's going to help us to develop actual clinical trials. So this type of data will help us to design better clinical trials. It will provide important information on things like what symptoms to measure, how long a trial should last, and actually what outcomes are most important to patients. Because At the end of the day, this is what all of this is for. It's for the patient. So natural history study data is going to actually allow us to design clinical trials that have the patient in mind. So next, what I want to move on to is talking about three really innovative treatment approaches, which are becoming more and more prevalent in the field. And the first of these is nucleoside supplementation. So first of all, we have how to make DNA. So again, we've got these instructions, these kind of building blocks, A plus B plus C. And these are what we like to call nucleosides. So A is a nucleoside, B is a nucleoside, C is a nucleoside in this scenario. And these nucleosides are the building blocks for making DNA. Think of them as the different ingredients that we need to make different parts of the body. So in what I like to refer to as the big mixing bowl of life, if we add in those nucleosides and we give them a mix, we're going to come out with a healthy mitochondria. But in some mitochondrial diseases, the problem lies in the mitochondria's ability to actually produce energy because they don't have the right ingredients. So instead of A plus B plus C, they have A plus B plus D. So when we put those into the big mixing bowl of life and we give them a mix, it gives you a faulty mitochondria, a mitochondria that doesn't work properly. But by providing extra ingredients, so these nucleosides, the A, B, and C, we can actually give the mitochondria the ingredients that they need to actually work properly. We're giving them the ingredients that they need to make good mitochondria. So when you put that into the big mixing bowl of life and give it a mix, instead of a faulty mitochondria, it's going to spit out a good working mitochondria. And that is essentially, in a nutshell, what nucleoside supplementation is. It's providing those extra ingredients to make sure that the mitochondria has the ingredients that they need to work properly. Then something else that's sort of gaining a lot of traction is gene therapy. And the goal of gene therapy is to correct the genetic errors that affect how mitochondria function, so that essentially the mitochondria can work properly and produce all of the energy that the body needs in order to function properly. So what happens first is a scientist will walk into the lab and they'll identify the error in the gene, which is causing the mitochondrial disease. They'll have a look at the DNA and look for those breakages, those changes, whatever it is. They're going to try and find what is causing the disease. Then they're going to create a healthy version of that gene or a tool to fix the error. So when I talk about a tool, think about this as maybe some scissors that are going to go in there and they're going to cut out the error, or they're going to fix that error in the first place. Then that healthy gene, which has been fixed, or that tool, so the scissors, are going to be packaged into a harmless virus. And like normal vaccines, this virus is going to be administered to a patient via an injection. And once in the body, that virus is going to travel all around, and that healthy gene or tool is going to be carried into all of the different parts of the body. Think again about the places of the body that require lots of energy, that are going to have lots of mitochondria. And then once inside the body, that healthy gene or that tool is going to get to work, and it's actually going to repair or replace the errors. So repair by either cutting that out and replacing it with the correct part of the sequence, or it's going to replace it with the healthy gene. And that is what gene therapy is. Then we come to stem cell therapy. Now, stem cells are really special, really interesting cells in the body that can develop into essentially any type of cell in the body that they want to. And the way that I like to describe this is, think of a stem cell as a blank piece of paper in a page that can be turned into any page in a book. So it can be turned into an introductory page. It can be turned into the final chapter of a book. It can be turned into absolutely anything. A stem cell can become a cell that works within your heart. It can turn into a cell that works within your lungs. It kind of turn into absolutely anything that you want it to turn into. So scientists can take these stem cells and encourage them to essentially become cells that have really healthy mitochondria. Like with the gene therapy, these can then be introduced into the body via an injection, where they can replace cells with faulty mitochondria. and go to all of the different parts of the body that they need to, and potentially improve the function of the organs in the body that are affected by the mitochondrial disease by actually replacing the cells in that part of the body with cells that have healthy mitochondria. So you might be sitting there thinking, well, this all sounds amazing. Why isn't it being used for everybody? And actually, that kind of relates back to this slightly confusing image that I don't really expect you to take too much from, other than this really nicely demonstrates that there's lots of different types of mitochondrial disease. These are all different types of mitochondrial disease that you can have, all caused by different types of genes. And because there's over 200 identified mitochondrial diseases, there's over 350 known disease-causing genes. New types are likely to be discovered as our understanding of mitochondria and mitochondrial disease advances. And each type of mitochondrial disease has really unique clinical features and can also vary in terms of severity of symptoms. So like I said before, you might have somebody at the start of the room you might have somebody at the front of the room who has a particular type of symptom and somebody at the back of the room who has a different type of symptom. That is going to cause a lot of problems. And it means that it's really hard to target a specific type of mitochondrial disease. Every patient is so different. And because of that, there is no one size fits all approach. What works for one type of mitochondrial disease or one type of patient is very unlikely to work for absolutely everybody. And that means that this can't be used for everybody, but it does mean that we can find populations of patients that this can work for. So now we come on to our Lilly funded research projects. What have we funded so far? Well, we've been very busy over the last few years, and we funded research in a lot of different areas. So things like dietary and lifestyle interventions, therapeutic development, biomarker identification and disease monitoring, understanding disease mechanisms, actually understanding how the disease works and how it progresses, diagnostic techniques, so trying to find different types of diagnosis, and also clinical and translational research projects, things like reviews and actually, again, looking within the literature, seeing is there anything that we can target, various different things like that. So you can see here, and I won't go through every single project, but we funded a lot of research in a lot of different areas. And this is all helping us to understand mitochondrial disease research as a whole. And that's ultimately going to help in us developing these treatments and hopefully finding a cure one day. So our current Lilly funded research projects, one of them is a therapeutic development project, which is the 2DG, Experimental Medicine Project. And this is essentially testing a chemical that has been found to increase a number of healthy mitochondria in the lab. So it's actually specifically looking to see if this chemical has the same effects on people with the M32438G mutation, so a very common mitochondrial disease mutation. And essentially, this study is going to help us to figure out what the best dose of this particular chemical is going to be used in future clinical trials to benefit patients. Then we have another treatment, which is the deoxynucleoside-based treatment for mitochondrial DNA disorders. And this is essentially giving mice with MPV17 a supplement to see if it can fix the damaged DNA in their body to actually prevent damage to their liver and muscles, which is seen in a lot of mitochondrial disease patients who have the MPV17 mutation. And this is really going to show if this is a treatment that actually works and can be used on people in future. We then have a proof of concept study for an mRNA-based gene therapy project for Mingi. And as we know, viral-based treatments for Mingi are very expensive, for all they're very interesting. And unfortunately, they do have some potential risks. So this particular study is testing a more affordable and safer gene therapy treatment that can be used on patients in the future, hopefully. As I said, this could hopefully open doors for future treatments of mito, not just for Mingi, but also for other mitochondrial diseases as well. Then we have dietary and lifestyle interventions. So we have the Emerald pilot study, which is evaluating a remote microphone in patients with mitochondrial disease. Here, we're testing a new device called a remote microphone assistive listening device, or an ALD, which works with traditional hearing aids to essentially enhance hearing. And this is going to really help us see if using this aid can help us to actually improve hearing and boost well-being, because that's part and parcel of it as well. It's not all about improving the symptoms. It's actually about improving the emotional burden and physical burden as well. Then one of our newer projects is developing a wearable technology to optimize balance and functional outcomes in people with mitochondrial disease who actually participate in unsupervised activity at home. So this particular project is creating a wearable device and an app that could help mitochondrial patients who have trouble with balance, and it will monitor their activity and hopefully improve their posture and balance, reducing fall risks. So this project is helping the team to develop the best type of app and also a device that could be used for larger studies in the future, because this is a small scale study and could hopefully be used in future on larger scale studies with more people. Then we have things like biomarker identification and disease monitoring. So measurement of muscle oxygen extraction using MRI as a disease biomarker. So this particular study is testing a new MRI technique to measure how well muscles use oxygen, which could hopefully be a better way to detect changes in muscle health in mito patients rather than a muscle biopsy. And this could lead to more accurate diagnoses and hopefully help with new treatments as well. So it's a sort of a multi-fold project that's going to be looking at a lot of different areas. Then we have a systematic review of biomarkers for mitochondrial disease. So a systematic review is essentially looking at data from around the world to see what signs can be used in mitochondrial disease clinical trials. So a biomarker is something like looking at the levels of lactate in the blood. That's a biomarker. So this is looking to see, can we maybe find something that's not being looked at yet? Are there any gaps in what is being researched? And can we actually target that? And it's going to help us find better ways to track the progress of mito. And like I said, help find any gaps where future research can focus. In terms of underlying disease mechanisms, we have another project that's quite new, which is underlying pathways for the treatment of mitochondrial disease. And this particular study is looking at the role of the immune system, which is a hot topic in mitochondrial disease research, and looking to see if there's any part of the immune response that could be targeted for treatment of mito symptoms. And when I talk about the immune response, essentially what I mean is if somebody gets a cold or a virus, their immune system in their body is going to kick into action. You're going to get lots of blood cells and lots of things going on in the body that is basically going to help to fend off that virus. And that is our immune response. And that is what this particular study is going to be looking at and helping us to find future targets for treatments. Then a clinical and translational research study is psychiatric and brain imaging phenotyping of primary mitochondrial diseases project, which is gathering data on neuropsychiatric symptoms and brain imaging in adults with mitochondrial disease. And this data is being used when future studies to try and actually restore mitochondrial function in the brain. And this is going to help us to improve clinical care and also future drug trials as well. Then we have the Transform project, or the transcranial direct current stimulation for epilepsy mitochondrial disease project. They've always got long names. And this is studying transcranial direct current stimulation as a potential treatment for epilepsy with mito patients. So patients are subjected to this direct current stimulation, and it's a very weak electrical current to the brain. And it's going to show us if this particular treatment actually reduces seizures and could be used to treat mitochondrial disease patients who suffer from seizures. And then a diagnostic technique is looking to see if red light can lift droopy eyelids in mitochondrial disease. This is a clinical trial which is currently recruiting. And essentially, red light is thought to improve how mitochondria actually work. And this study is testing to see if red light can actually specifically help children with mitochondrial disease open their eyes more fully. So this is children who have ptosis or droopy eyelids, and they are subjected to red light therapy. And this study is basically seeing, does this improve the droopiness of the eyelids? And hopefully this is going to lead to a way to improve children's symptoms, but also maybe identify a treatment that could be used across the board for people who have droopy eyelids in future. So just to kind of finish up, there's a lot of other kind of Lilly funded research that's going on. And what I wanted to end on is our Lilly Precision Medicine Diagnostics project. So way back in well, a, quite a while ago, we funded the Lilly exome sequencing project, which essentially was looking to diagnose patients. And while that was really useful and diagnosed a lot of patients, there still remain a lot of patients who are undiagnosed. And as we know, a genetic diagnosis of mito is absolutely essential for patients and families to bring closure, be allowed access to clinical trials and potential new treatments, but also to access those reproductive options, which can be so important to families. So it's really important to get that genetic diagnosis and sometimes not very easy. And like I said, there's a lot of patients who remain undiagnosed. And because of that, we've launched the Lilly Precision Medicine Diagnostics Project, which is in collaboration with three highly specialised services for mitochondrial disease in London, Newcastle, and Oxford. And this is essentially looking at already existing genetic data, reanalyzing it if it's gone through the NHS pipeline and unfortunately a genetic diagnosis hasn't been obtained. People can be referred into this project, which will reanalyze the data and look for known disease-causing genes, but also use cutting-edge technologies to reanalyze that data and see, is there anything that's potentially being missed? Is there anything that looks suspicious that could be causing the mitochondrial disease? And this is hoped to actually boost diagnosis of mitochondrial disease by hopefully up to around 30 or 40%. So this is a huge project that we're going to be funding for the next 3 to 4 years and is hopefully going to get a genetic diagnosis for as many patients as possible. There's a lot of different places that are opening up across the UK to recruit these patients through. And this is going to be a really exciting time for mitochondrial research in the UK. Thank you very much.